Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video with Swagglehos. And in this video, we have to continue our coverage here of the Glenn from the Comic Palace epic rant that has, again, caused a stir in the comic book industry, publishing industry, on the comic book social media spaces. All across the board, this story continues on. And Mark Millar, who was one of the big name creators to actually kind of defend Glenn's stance on what he felt about the current issues going on with Marvel Publishing and DC Publishing and the big two, has been doing a lot of groundwork to sort of continue to get Glenn's message out there and really try to figure out what some of the pain points of the comic book industry are that at least Glenn was pointing to. And he recently released this video podcast that he did with 3 different comic book retailers, very big retailers across the country. And it is a fantastic video. I highly recommend you guys watch it. I'm going to put a link in the description to that video so that you guys can check it out. Of course, before I give my commentary on it, which again, I think that giving credit to other content creators is a very, very important thing to do. So that is why I will make sure that you guys are linked to that video. But I'm going to give some thoughts on it here in this video today because, I of course did my commentary on what I felt Glenn had said, and I pointed out some of the things that I saw from my perspective, here working in entertainment and, being able to kind of commentate from a writer's perspective or a filmmaker's perspective and apply it to some of my own sort of personal experiences. And I asked in that video if you guys were interested in me kind of sharing more of what I thought about this, and overwhelmingly the comments were absolutely do so. So I wanted to kind of pick out a couple of the things that they said in their podcast. I'm going to play short segments of it just to sort of set me up to give some more added context and conversation into it. And it was really interesting to hear what these retailers had to say. I learned a lot of new things about, their perspective on things, but also it kind of, validated a lot of the things that I was talking about in my previous video. So in this video, we're going to get into it. We're going to talk about this. And then later on, I also want to talk about this tweet that was posted from a former DC editor that was very, very interesting, based on what she felt was the current goal of publishing companies, specifically that of the big two, and where that might be going in the future. But of course, before I get into it, if you guys could like, comment, subscribe, I'd appreciate it. Help support the channel, do those things. But let us get into this video here today. Now, here is the YouTube channel. Here is the YouTube video. It is called Millar Time, Episode 21, Comic Book Retailer Roundtable. Now, if you guys don't know, Mark Millar actually has a YouTube channel. It's called Millar Time right there. So go check out his channel. Go subscribe to him. Make sure that you check this out after. And of course, I'm sure you guys also know Mark Millar is one of the great comic book writers of the last, 20, 30 years. I mean, he created Kick-Ass. He created, he wrote Marvel Civil War, one of the big storylines, of the past like 30 years in Marvel comic books. I mean, he's a fantastic writer, somebody I definitely look up to quite a lot. And he's been, putting out YouTube videos, making YouTube content, and doing podcast episodes with other fellow creators. And again, like I said at the beginning, he was one of the first people to defend Glenn's rant on Twitter, and actually decided to, take matters into his own hands and sort of see if he can kind of uncover like what are some of the pain points. He really wanted to reach out and talk to some of the retailers to see if other people felt the way that Glenn felt. And he had these 3 gentlemen here on his channel: John Robinson, Coliseum Comics, and Ryan, who I believe is a retailer in Florida. And all of these guys, had really, really great, insightful things to say. They all are veterans of the comic book industry, being retailers for 40 plus years, each of them, and have multiple retail stores. And Mark just really, asked them some of the tough questions. And I think, this type of conversation is one of the most important things to be had, I think, in the comic book space right now. Obviously, on my channel here, we talk mostly about the vintage market. We don't really get too much into the sort of political side of things. We don't really speak even too much about new comic books unless it is like a storyline that kind of relates to, secondary market issues. But I think that you guys know, I mean, the political landscape, the current comic book landscape, wokeness and, all this stuff has been a huge hot button issue in the current comic book community for quite a long time. And a lot of the conversation around it, a lot of the rhetoric has become like, toxic, two sides yelling at each other and no one really wanting to have conversations, or valid critiques being dismissed as, being racist or whatever the case is, or all the kind of ists and phobes and things like that. And, while what is being said in this video isn't the first time these things have been said, I think that the fact that Mark Millar, someone who is well respected within the comic book community, is having these tough conversations, and that this video is purely based in here's the perspective of the retailers, strictly based on numbers and sales. I think that this is, it's an important one to be had, because you need these types of figureheads in the space to actually have these conversations in a very mature and fact-based kind of way, that kind of cuts through all of the noise. And again, kudos to them for actually doing this here. But again, I want to highlight a few of the talking points and commentate on them. This first one right here, in terms of sales, that the guy, I forget his name, the guy from Coliseum Comics actually had to say. So let's listen to this clip and then we'll get into it.
Our DC sales from 2022 to 2023 have dropped 14%. Marvel has dropped 8%. That may not sound terrible, but if we take out the ratio variance, which means the actual comics people are reading, DC is down 17% across my chain. Marvel is down 24%.
Wow.
Boom is down 73%.
Are you serious? Wow.
So to recap what he just said right there is that, yes, comic book sales are down, year over year, the last couple of years. But if you adjust it and take out the retail variance and the incentive variance and all that sort of thing, they're down significantly more, which basically that means that a lot of the money that is being created in the direct market sales is basically inflated due to these, say, 1 in 100 covers or 1 in 200 covers and things like that. And this is something that, I was saying in my previous video, where I was talking about, being a little bit sort of black-pilled on the whole situation, is, again, I don't necessarily think that that's going to be surprising to Marvel or DC. I think that they know that they are able to make easy sales catering to those whales, or, the people who speculate, or the people that want to buy these covers, because they're trying to, flip it on eBay or whatever the case is. Like, they're okay with this. I mean, again, I've said, if you're somebody who is familiar with like video games or microtransactions and, iPhone games and things like that, like, this is kind of the model. Like, you always cater to the whales. Like, the whales are going to be the ones that give you the most money. And all these companies are always going to do the thing that is like, what is the easiest thing to do that creates the least amount of effort and the most amount of reward? And basically, putting a foil on a cover and calling it a 1 in 100 and making it exclusive and that whole thing is just way easier to do than investing, the time, money, and resource into telling a good story. And so they're just sort of chasing that kind of quick buck. And it's really not surprising at all. And that, again, it's great to hear these guys mention that and have it be actually validated with the sales numbers, like what just sort of seemed empirically to be true. Now, one of the other things that I thought was interesting was, I'm going to flash forward here to another part of the conversation where the John Robertson actually talks about, people not wanting to be fired. So let's play this clip and then I'll give you a little bit of commentary.
I think a lot of people in this industry are just worried about their job. Yeah. And that's it. And that's part of the problem. And I understand where they're coming from. They got a family, they got kids. The last thing they want to do is take a chance with some of the things that Phil put in his article that he recommended they do, puts their jobs on the line because they're long-term plans. It's not going to instantly show a profit. Yeah. Dropping 7 more covers on a book is going to show a profit. And then their bosses are going to say, nicely done. You made more money this quarter than you did last quarter.
So that right there, I thought was, another just gem in this conversation. This idea of, in my previous video, I said, most people they're not thinking about 10 years down the road, right? Everyone is just trying to make their quarterly profits and things like that. And what is easier to sell? Like variant covers, a new #1 issue, whatever is the easiest thing to get, artificial sales is going to be the thing that people are going to chase because it's going to look the best on their reports or their, analytics, or it's going to look the best on their financials versus like, some kind of nebulous number that you really can't figure out, which is like brand affiliation or brand affinity because, you've been writing a ghostwriter, for 15 issues and like everybody really loves the story. You can't pull that, right? Like it's really hard for them to figure that out in the numbers and the data and the tech way of doing things. All they need to do is say, hey, we put a variant cover on this one, and we sold twice as many because, you know, the collectors had to collect both variant covers as opposed to wanting to read the story. So I thought that was really interesting as well. And again, the incentive structure behind that, you know, short-term gains, short-term profits are the things that most people are chasing, and not necessarily, long-term brand loyalty and immersion or being, immersed in the story. The last little clip I want to show before we kind of move on to some of the other conversations, again, the tweet that I thought was really, really interesting and I definitely wanted to commentate on, was this last little idea here about how they see the incentive of writers going on to other things like, you know, Hollywood and video games and things of this nature. And this is something that, you know, I definitely would like to commentate on after. But let's hear what they had to say first.
And now it's like a fraction of that, because these creators think, I'm going to leave, I'm going to go try video games, I'm going to try TV. My fans will be there when I come back. And they're not. The fans move on.
They do move on. Very
numbers are down. Battle Chasers is another one. Like Joe Mad left video games, it comes back, and it's not the 100+ juggernaut it used to be. By any stretch.
That was a decade between, not just 6 months, but even 6 months. People forget. People absolutely forget. They move on to the next thing. And unfortunately, I think people are moving on to video games. They're moving on to Kindle. They're moving on to other things rather than an actual printed comic, you know, that they can hold in their hand. So,
but do you not think that's a quality issue as well? Because I remember when I was in my 20s when I started.
So right there, you know, you kind of jumped a little bit mid-conversation, but just to give it a little bit of added context again is what these guys were saying is, you know, a lot of these writers, maybe they go onto a project, there's people that are buying up the comic books, they're interested in, you know, their writing, and then they end up moving on, off of the title, they go write a video game, they work in this other space, maybe they get into a writer's room on a TV show and whatever, and then they come back. And these guys are saying that when they come back, you know, the audience is not there waiting for them. One of the things I want to say to that is, again, is this idea of like what I was saying in my previous video, where when Glenn had this comment where, you know, the writers back in the day used to really like care about these stories. And again, what I would say to that is the writers back in the day, you know, comic books as a medium for them to write in was actually something that they could do. Like they could say when they were a kid, oh, I want to be a comic book writer. And that would be like the thing that they would actually decide to do. But in today's world, most writers, I mean, again, there are so few people that can actually make a good living writing comic books alone. You know, the big companies, the DCs, the Marvels, they just simply do not pay enough. Like the money is just not there for most comic book writers to do it. So these writers have to be, you know, transient. They have to go to, video games. They have to write for, novels, or they move on to screenwriting and all this sort of stuff. And they're just looking for the next job. I mean, there's so many more avenues to do creative storytelling than there ever was before, you know, and so where a lot of people who, you know, maybe once upon a time there would be somebody who would be a comic book writer if they were, you know, a professional working in the 80s. Whereas now, like maybe that person, you know, is working for Blizzard and they're writing, you know, Diablo, you know, and so that same skill set is being applied to other avenues, you know, or how many iPhone games have writing, you know, involved in it? How many iPhone games have, you know, fantasy stories or superhero things or whatever the case is? And there's tons of writers working for that stuff. So, those super talented, best writers that maybe once upon a time would have gone to comic books for it to be their thing that they would, have a career in, they're just not there. And the publishing companies just don't have the money or interest in paying the top tier talent to actually work for them anymore. And that is ultimately going to lead to, you know, the retail stores and the whole industry hemorrhaging fans and hemorrhaging money as a result of it. Now, the last little thing that I'm not going to play for you guys here, but I did want to say that I thought was really interesting was, you know, in this video later on, which again, I will link in the description so that you guys can watch it. I highly recommend you watch it. There's so much good information in it. Is they talked about how back issue sales are actually up quite significantly for all of their stores. And I find that really interesting here is that, you know, I made a comment in my last video how, you know, here on this channel, you know, I'm somebody who loves comic book collecting. I love back issues. I love vintage. I mean, you guys know this. And that's what we spend our time here on the channel talking about is, you know, collecting values, you know, secondary market, things like that. And it's something that I've always been interested in, and I've seen my channel grow with it. And I've made mention, if I talk about, secondary market stuff for a Silver Age comic book, that's a video that people, generally speaking, at least the ones watching here, are much more interested in than if I did a review of the new Ghost Rider title. And I think that is an indication that again, most people have more interest in back issues than they do of new current comic books. I mean, I think there is a hunger there for new comic books. People would love to read new comic books if they felt like the quality was there. But it just doesn't seem to be the case. And those retailers were, validating that point. And one of the things that they mentioned that was really, really interesting is they also mentioned it's not just old guys that are looking at the back issues. It's actually a lot of young people that are now hearing about these great stories of old and great back issues of old. And they're looking to those ones too, not even just from a collecting standpoint, but, also just from a reading standpoint. So I thought that was very, very interesting. And I kind of relate that to one of my other Swagglecast videos where I did with reserved investments, where a lot of people were thinking that we were maybe overly bearish on, comic books. But I do think that there actually is a substantial portion of young people looking to read old comic books. And if Marvel and DC were able to sort of cultivate a better space, a better ecosystem with current comic books, like, those things could be self-serving to each other, and you can actually have a lot of the young audience capture, which again is something I'm going to talk about at the end of this video because I have a lot of thoughts on that as well. But lastly, before we go, I did want to also kind of point this out to you guys, because this is sort of related to the story, coming off of the heels of Mark Millar putting out all this information, these interviews, the Glenn from the Comic Book Palace and all this stuff. There was a person here, Valerie Orazio, who is a former DC editor. She was somebody who was an editor, who worked at DC, also wrote some comic books as well. She made this tweet and it got a lot of attention, and I thought it was very interesting to talk about, and I wanted to kind of share it with you guys here. Again, I'll put a link in the description for this one, but she brought up two big points. Actually, let me just read them for you guys here, and then we can talk about it from there. The goal of a number of comic industry media professionals has been for a while to see the direct market finally collapse, making bookstores and libraries the main places to carry comic book material. They want this to take place for several reasons. One, from a business perspective, it is much more likely for bookstores and libraries to purchase and support the specific material they produce. And the drive for numbers and profits aren't so much of an immediate issue as with the direct market space. Rather, the graphic novels and such treated are more like rarefied entity in the book space, more like beautiful ideas that exist on their own merit and are buoyed by PR. So this is super, super interesting. And, when she talks about it, even though it sounds callous and cruel, like, you can completely understand why these companies are moving this way. So what she basically is saying is that, these publishing companies, Marvel and DC, for the longest time, they would love it if they didn't have to work in the direct comic floppy space anymore. They would actually love to get rid of that. They would love it if comic book stores didn't exist and they can just consign or sell their material to, whatever, Barnes and Nobles and whatever bookstores are left. I mean, are any bookstores left? I don't know. Amazon bookstore or whatever. And they would rather just do that because one of the things that she is talking about here, which makes a lot of sense, is that, comic book stores, comic shop owners, they still are, they have final order cutoff, right? They're making decisions on what they want to purchase. It's sort of a la carte. They're doing the work, thinking about their audience, who wants to read what, and they have to be very, very frugal with what they purchase because the margins are so thin. But if you have like a big retail chain like Barnes and Noble, that can just be like, oh, yeah, sure, we'll just order everything. If it sells, who cares? If it doesn't, who cares? And again, like rarefied, how did she put it? Rarefied, beautiful ideas that exist based on their own merit is, I think Marvel Publishing, they just like the idea of like comics should just exist to exist. They're not actually there to make money. We sell it to these big retail chain bookstores and they can just have it on their shelves and they're just there. When you go into a bookstore, you get your, Starbucks coffee, you buy your, New York Times bestseller. Oh yeah, I'll pick up a Spider-Man trade, whatever, because it's more of a lifestyle than it is something that you have this actual fan base that likes to collect and likes to actually read these stories and that the stories actually matter. So that's something that they would want to get rid of. And it makes a lot of sense that they would want to get rid of that too, because, as long as the direct market exists, as long as retail stores, have so much conversation about sales numbers and figures and this and that and this, like that puts a lot of pressure on Marvel and DC to actually have to hit these quotas. Like these companies would love it if they didn't have to disclose what the sales figures were for, their issues. Like, of course it's bad PR if all of a sudden it's like, oh, this Amazing Spider-Man is only selling 10,000 copies. Like, they don't want that out there. Like, they don't want that pressure to actually have to hit certain numbers. And if they're able to just kind of have them sit in bookstores where you don't really count it, as far as like direct sales are concerned, then that would take all that pressure off and they wouldn't have to worry about it. And then the other thing she said here is number 2, there is a big class bias against direct market comic book stores in favor of more dignified bookstore and library scenario. This reflects a longstanding embarrassment on the part of some comic industry professionals and scholars regarding ye olde comic shops, which they often, mostly in private, cast as being run and patronized by low-class, uncouth, proletariat barbarians. The comic book guy from The Simpsons is often invoked. Part of the reasons they feel this way is their own insecurities, because of course they are the cool comic fans. They're not Gasp the nerds themselves, et cetera, et cetera. I'll put again a link in the description if you guys want to read this whole thing. And I can totally see that. I can totally see that. Again, I mean, one of the things that people jumped on Glenn for is everyone quickly dismissed him as like, oh, like he's like the Simpsons meme, right? He's like the comic book nerd guy. And I understand it. I mean, there seems to be such an allergy to like nerd culture, but not nerd culture like cool nerd culture, like nerd culture like real nerd culture. And for better or for worse, like these are that people, like the comic book people are the nerds or whatever it is. And yes, there's, for a long time, some of those shops are a little bit dirty and a little bit unorganized. And, we can do a little bit better, guys. We can do a little bit better. But at the same time, you can see how, as far as like these brands are concerned, like they don't want to like deal with these kind of old, dusty, hole in the wall retail stores. They want like, the sexy big malls and Barnes and Nobles and things like that. And it's really a shame. And it's been something that I've been thinking about quite a bit, in thinking about Marvel publishing and DC publishing and the publishing companies, and now being, someone who's kind of in the comic book space, as having been somebody who has worked in film and entertainment, has worked in music, has worked in video games. I feel like Marvel and DC have some of the best fans out there, but they have the absolute worst community building outreach of all entertainment industries. Like, take this. I'm wearing this thing right here. This is not Dark Horse, right? This is Team Liquid. If you guys happen to know, Team Liquid is an esports organization. They have, esports teams and in all sorts of video games and competitive video games and things like that. I mean, you look at these video game companies and what they do as far as their outreach for their fans. Like, they have so much stuff. So many things that they put together, so many marketing things. They do so many documentaries, slice of life things, content pieces, talking about people who play their games. There is definitely a love for the people that love, their companies. Marvel and DC, you don't see any of that. Like, where does that exist? The comic shops have been doing that, for Marvel and DC. Like, you talk about Free Comic Book Day, community outreach, community building, all this sort of stuff. That is what the comic book shops do. Marvel and DC should be doing that themselves. Like, you go to Marvel Entertainment's YouTube channel, where is like the community piece? Where is like, they could have Glenn from the Comic Book Palace. Like, his show should be on Marvel Entertainment's YouTube. You know what I mean? Like, they should be having, these content pieces, people in the community, stories, talk about comic books, history, the people that love this stuff, that go to the comic book shows, the cons, all this sort of stuff. They should be doing profiles and pieces on all of these, great people that are in this hobby to showcase and demonstrate how fun of a hobby that it actually is. Like, that's one of the things, like, the social proof. Like, look at how many amazing people there are. And it's not just like, the Simpsons comic book nerd guy. I've had the experience. I've gone to shows. I've met so many amazing people in this hobby, and they do such a poor job of showing that to the world, how many people love comic books. And I don't know what it is. They have such an allergy towards their own fan base. And I think it's really, really a shame. And I think, again, Mark Millar and having these conversations with the retailers and shining a spotlight on this stuff and actually bringing to light, some of the community aspects and what people are saying on the streets and the ground level, and having these tough conversations, I think is so important. And again, I wanted to do another video on the topic here today and commentate on it. And I once again highly recommend you guys check out that video. Anyways, that's all right for this one. I think I'm done, making my points and having this conversation with you guys here today. It, again, is a very, very interesting thing going on in the industry, and I think it's really, really important that someone like Mark Millar is sort of the face of it, even though, he's just kind of asking questions, and these are things that have been talked about for years now. I think it's great that he's finally doing it because, again, I think he's respected enough that people maybe on both ends of the aisle will be able to listen to him and not get so caught up on, the tribalism that exists on both sides. Anyways, let me know what you guys think. What did you guys think about that interview? What did you guys think about that tweet? What do you guys think about the current state of the industry and the hobby? Let me know in the comments. I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts. Anyways, thanks so much for watching. See y'all in the next video.